Hello there BookTube, my name is Daniel, welcome back to my channel Guilty Feet. Ain't nothing gonna break my stride, ain't nothing gonna hold me, I've got no rhythm. And today I'm going to do a sort of catch up of a couple of weeks worth of reading. I'm trying, I've been trying experimenting different things. I've been doing standalone videos based on one book, because I sometimes think, I don't know, I'm trying this out now. So this is actually a couple of weeks worth of reading. It includes two books that I've done a video on, so I'll go through them quickly for March Mystery Madness, but it also includes a recent book of non-fiction and two big novels of last year, and then some graphic novels, which I know people hate it when I talk too much about them, but that's what I read. So first of all, I'll get the two mystery books out the way first of all, because I've just done a whole video of them, which should be up already for March Mystery Madness, which were The Drowning Pool by Ross MacDonald, the second in the Lou Archer series, and The Hanged Man of Saint Folion by George Simenon, the fourth in the Maigret series. So I read both those and did a video about my experience with them. Okay, so let's talk about, you know what I'm going to do first? I'm going to get all the graphic novels, do this out of chronological order, all the graphic novels out of the way first, and then come back and talk about stuff. So Saga of Swamp Thing. So I read actually three of these, 3 volumes, each containing about 6 issues from Alan Moore's original run, starting from his first issue in about issue 20 of the series, back in the 80s, where I wasn't reading this because I don't like horror. I wasn't going to read anything too scary, and I didn't really know who Alan Moore was at the time. But in the last I discovered who Alan Moore was sort of round about then, and read Watchmen and stuff like that. And over the last few years, I've been going back and picking up Alan Moore's earlier stuff that he did for 2000 AD. I read The Ballad of Halo Jones, and I thought I would go back to his run on Swamp Thing, which is pretty fundamental to his career, but also to our understanding of what comics can do. Without this run on Swamp Thing, we probably don't get Vertigo comics at all. Neil Gaiman is definitely reaching in and tapping into some of the same things, and emboldened, I think, by some of the work that Alan Moore has done here. And people who know more about this kind of work than I do will know that it is in itself tapping into horror comics and stuff. The House of Secrets from the early 70s, Swamp Thing in particular, started in House of Secrets issue 92, Bernie Wrightson and Len Wein, I believe, and then earlier stuff going back to this sort of horror pre-comics code, horror comics of the, the 50s. So the whole world that I don't really know anything about and have never really wanted to explore, and we'll revisit that in a second because I've got some Hellboy stuff as well. So that idea, that also taps into that. So I'm reading second generation of that. Like, I'm too scared to go back to the originals and not super keen to find out, but I find this stuff compelling. And so this is book 3 of this series. So I picked up 1, 2, and 3 on Facebook. I don't have 4, 5, and 6, which is the entire Alan Moore run of Saga of Swamp Thing in the 80s. But this is where we get to John Constantine. So he completely reinvented Swamp Thing as this sort of shambling monster that was created when a man fell into the swamp, and so it's a monster with humanity and was all that. And Alan Moore came in, threw that all out, and instead of Swamp Thing being this man, Alec Holland, who has transformed into a monster, Alec Holland is dead, but some of his I don't want to use the word soul here, but some of his essence seeps into the swamp and forms this creature, the Swamp Thing. So the Swamp Thing is not Alec Holland. The Swamp Thing, we learn over the course of these issues, is some kind of plant elemental in touch with everything green throughout the planet. And so if he's knocked down or defeated in one place, he can regrow himself somewhere else. And that's part of that's where we get to in this third volume. John Constantine appears for the first time in these comics in issue 37. John Constantine becomes a Hellblazer. You may know him from he had a short-lived series. There was a movie, Constantine, with Keanu Reeves, that had really nothing to do with just using the name, but he also showed up in that it was a Constantine series on the CW, and that the Legends, I think he shows up there with a thick Liverpool accent, even though he starts as a Cockney but grew up in Liverpool. Whatever, the original back. Anyway, he's some kind of mage and in touch, and he appears to Swamp Thing and seems to be guiding him in these early issues. And kind of fun, loved it. The artwork is sort of spectacular. That's an underwater sea vampire. There's some really creepy stuff going on here. Some deep stuff about the time, if you remember the 80s, we were all obsessed that we were going to die in a nuclear tragedy, and that plays in here, that fear of the nuclear clock. There's just some great standard horror tropes. We have a werewolf, we have all sorts of creepy weird things going on, but this sort of shambling figure in the center of it that despite his now even less connection with humanity appears to embrace the humanity and desire to help people. That's Saga of the Swamp Thing in these lovely big volumes. I really would love to get hold of 4, 5, and 6 in this series. If you know anyone who's got them and selling them cheap, I will definitely make a bid. Then another writer that I'm also following is Ed Brubaker, and I've been following him across his independent stuff and his crime stuff, also into Captain America and some of his superhero stuff. And this is an early work. This is Incognito again with Sean Phillips, which he did the whole criminal series, which I'm slowly working through. And this is sort of more standard, early stuff. There's a second volume of this. I think this is. No, it doesn't say number 1, but I think this is 6 issues, and I think there were more issues after this. And Incognito here, it's about a supervillain in witness protection. So kind of clunky, didn't really zing for me. The artwork is this lovely sort of shadowy, dark artwork that we've seen Sean Phillips do throughout that criminal series. And this was okay, and it's sort of, this is not kids' comics by any stretch. These are, if there really were villains with superpowers, they would be brutal and hard to stop. And that's what's going on here. And it was okay. And then I picked these up nearly 2 years ago in that biggest haul of all time when I went to London and ordered a whole bunch of stuff. This was part of a collection of Hellboy stuff that I bought at the time when I was trying to get through volumes of the. So this is Weird Tales. Featuring Hellboy. So this was when Mike Mignola, who was the creator of Hellboy, the writer and the artist on the original Hellboy series, which starts in sort of the early 90s. This is 10 years in. This is from 20 years ago. This is the early 2000s. The first Hellboy movie, which was Guillermo del Toro's movie with Ron Perlman as Hellboy, was coming out. And so and Mike Mignola was very involved in production. He took time off writing the Hellboy comic and gave the space to a whole bunch of other artists and writers who wanted to write Hellboy. What's remarkable about this is this is only 10 years in now. Hellboy's been around 30 years. He feels like part of the scenery. But 10 years in, a new character had launched and had such a massive impact, as much on Mignola's peers as on the reading public. I think reading-wise, Hellboy might be the lower part of the first 100 characters that anybody would mention, but I think he had a sort of impact on the industry because he was tapping into some things that I said Alan Moore was tapping into. He grew up on those horror comics and then also the other stuff which I don't really know, the Edgar Allan Poe stuff and the H.P. Lovecraft stuff, which all too creepy for me, but all that Cthulhu mythology is all in Hellboy and demonology and all that kind of stuff. So these are two collections, I think, 6 or 8 issues in each, or 5 issues in each, whatever it is. This Weird Tales where it's an anthology series. So in each issue, there were 2 or 3 short stories, each with a different artist and a different writer telling a story from somewhere in the Hellboy universe. So you get stuff. So opening, we've got things like Eric Powell, who wrote The Goon, which I've read a couple of issues. I don't know if you've seen them on here. So he's got this kind of crazy artwork, and he's interested in the macabre and the weird and the crazy. And then you have completely different artwork. You've got some black and white stuff and some more comic thing. And each story has a different list of artists who are all, at the beginning, it breaks down exactly who the writers and artists are for each chapter. So we've got things like I said, Eric Powell. Other names that Randy Stradley is the story on one. I think he was an editor at Dark Horse many years. Fabian Nicieza, who was a writer on X-Men for a number of years. John Cassidy, Joe Casey, and so on and so on and so on. And then in volume 2, more of the same. Who we got here? Gene Colan, I see, is doing stuff. Craig Thompson, who I've read, he wrote Blankets, so he's got a whole story in here. and Ron Mars with art by Jim Starlin. What are other names that we might know? Some Akira Yoshida, Evan Dawkin, Jill Thompson, all sorts of different people. And again, so the artwork here varies from chapter to chapter, depending on who's writing and doing the story. Throwaway, non-essential. So I picked these up as part of a bundle. I think they cost me like £3 each, and they've got cover price on them of $18 when they came out new about 20 years ago. Non-essential, but as part of my reach out and project reading Hellboy, I went through 2 of these volumes in one morning, and very happy to have done so. Okay, let's talk now for 3 hardback books here. So 3 books that were published in 2022, 1 non-fiction and 2 fiction. The non-fiction is Hayley Campbell's All the Living and the Dead, which I picked up for half price. So this was cover price £18.99. I would have paid, what's that, £9.50 for it. Yeah, this was absolutely terrific. Hayley Campbell is a writer, journalist, I think born in Australia, but lives now and based in the UK. Her father, not to define people by who they're related to, her father is Eddie Campbell, who has worked with, see how this is all connected, with Alan Moore. He was the artist on From Hell, Alan Moore's epic, giant work about Jack the Ripper. And so Hayley Campbell grew up around those stories of the Ripper victims and art, photographs or whatever, whatever information there was about Jack the Ripper. Her father was researching while she was a young, impressionable child, and this made an impression on the young Hayley Campbell. And she talks about this at the beginning. So this is not me telling you, me deciding what the background you need to know about Hayley Campbell. This is how she introduces it, that she grew up with a father who worked with Alan Moore, who was obsessed with Jack the Ripper, blah, 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 blah. And this informed her whole attitude towards death. And she's written a book about the death industry. No, industry is too strong a word. About people who work around death. She repeats and makes it clear that her goal here is not to change how you feel about death, but to tell the stories, the people who live with death in their lives, and just tell those stories and share that with you so that you can then decide whether how you want to feel, whether death continues to be the scariest thing in the world, or how we relate to death and how different. So it's a series of chapters. Each one she talks to someone else whose life revolves around death. So we have an embalmer, we have a medical technician who works with cadavers, people who've had their bodies donated to medical science, how those bodies are treated. We get somebody who sculpts death masks. So a person dies and the family want a death mask made, and he goes to the funeral home before the body is buried and tries to capture a 3D version of the face, and talks in great detail about how in the hours after death the face changes shape and the skin tightens and everything, and so sometimes he has to pad things out and create that feeling like, because people want a version of their a beloved person they've lost, and they want it to be familiar to them and not necessarily an actual reflection of what they look like in death, but how they should be remembered in life. Somebody whose job is a crime scene cleaner, and so they talk about the brains and the blood and the things they have to deal with. Somebody who was an executioner in America, his job was pushing the button on the electric chair, and did so over a number of executions over a number of years, and talks about that, the preparation and the doing of it, and how he feels. Then there is a chapter where she spends time with a bereavement midwife. Just let that sit for a second. A bereavement midwife, somebody whose job, trained as a midwife, but now specializes in acting as a midwife for women giving birth to stillborn children, or counseling women who've lost babies at an earlier point in their pregnancy, perhaps haven't carried to term. What I want to say, so I'm now just giving examples of the 100 jobs, but I want to say that the common thread in all of these things is an enormous amount of empathy for the living and also for the dead. Enormous amount of respect for death and the dead. Even in the chapter about bodies that have been donated to medical science, Not all bodies are accepted, so there's how they deal with that. A family knew that this person, after they died, wanted their body donated, but for whatever reason, whatever thing they've gone through in life, it's of no use to other students. But how, when bodies do pass, whatever they needed, how the bodies are parceled up, because some of it has to go to students studying this, and some of it has to go to students studying that. But how everything is labelled and clearly marked, so that at the end of whatever it's gone through, the body is reunited and kept together, and then whatever the determination, whether it's cremation or whether it's burial, that the body is brought back together. There's an enormous amount of respect for the dead, and it's just a beautifully written, very accessible book. If you have any sense of the morbid, it's not like that. This is not a Wednesday Addams kind of thing where to be obsessed with death. It is I found it just really life affirming. Makes it too much. Maybe there's a personal thing. Haley Campbell talks about her Catholicism and so her relationship to death and the crucifixion of Jesus and his resurrection after 3 days, and she asks the questions well, and she knows what happens to a corpse after 3 days, the state of decomposition and what would happen. She talks, we know what rigor mortis does and when this and how bodies need to be handled, and so she remembers thinking and asking some of these questions of her religious teachers and being dissatisfied with some of the answers. My experience, of course, is the Jewish experience where bodies are buried very, very quickly. That is the Jewish tradition. You don't wait. So here there's a remarkable statistic that something like 55-60% of all bodies in America are embalmed because there's a waiting list for funerals. And she talks a little bit about COVID and how that even made it. But even in general, to book a date for a funeral and when you don't have to bury the body the next day, you can find a time that is convenient for everybody. Obviously, Sundays people. And the number of bodies that are embalmed now, the Jewish tradition is that we bury the bodies as quickly as possible, either the same day or the next day. If you have to wait for someone to come in from out of town, there is sensitivity towards that. But the drive is to bury the bodies very, very quickly. You need, it's rare that autopsies will be carried out. Jews get special permission to avoid them unless they're strictly necessary, because there is a sense of something not understood or foul play or whatever it is. But for the most part, Jewish bodies are buried very quickly, and so I've often been called out in the middle of the day and gone to a funeral, or found out one day that I'm going to have to go to a funeral tomorrow, because that's the nature of things. And when my own father passed away, I was with him when he died. Again, apologies if this is too much for anybody. My father had worked on the Chevra Kadisha, which is the set of volunteers that prepare Jewish bodies for burial. He was a medical man, he was a dentist, so he had some medical training, but there was a team. Not everybody who he worked with had the same kind of medical training, but these are people who over a period of time, it's pastor, you go, you sign, you volunteer for this, and you get taught the rituals and the way the body needs to be prepared. And in England, for example, Jews are not buried in fancy coffins, they're buried in bare pine boxes. In Israel, there are no coffins at all. Bodies are wrapped in a shroud and placed in the ground, and that can be disconcerting the first time you see that. I was used at least to, not that I went to that many funerals, but at least in the UK, I was used to a plain pine box. In Israel, it's a very different, you can see the outline of the body that is being placed in the ground. So my father had been part of this Chevra Kadisha that had prepared, washed, cleaned, prepared for burial people in the UK. And when he died, the people that worked on him and prepared his body for death were people with the team that he had been part of. And they found the whole thing very moving, and took it very seriously, and allowed my brother and I to be part of it. I wasn't involved in the cleaning of the body thing, but we went in to see my father in his coffin before they closed the lid. It's a pine on top. There's no nails. There are wooden dowels, which were with a mallet bashed in, and they left. There were all sorts of traditions. I think they left one undone. Anyway, So I had some experience with this process, which I found very humane and very loving and very uh, um, filled with honor and respect. And so, even though I come from a completely different tradition to Haley Campbell, I have a sort of reverence. I don't have any medical training. I have a reverence for death based on my own experience and I guess my curiosity. This is all a lot of personal stuff. It's a great bloody book. All the Living and the Dead by Haley Campbell. Just beautifully written, fascinating stories. I think anyone who has any sense of this, of their own mortality, of the mortality of others, and the desire to remove fear from any of this, I think would find something to enjoy in this. All the Living and the Dead by Haley Campbell. I've still got 2 novels here. I'll do them quickly. First of all, big novel from last year, Mercury Pictures Presents by Anthony Mara. I've read the first 2. One second. I read Mara's first 2 novels. I read them in the wrong order. So I read first The Tsar of Love and Techno, and then I read The Phenomenon of the Constellation of Vital Phenomena. This was his first novel. This, some people think of it as short stories. It's not short stories. They're interconnected short stories. It's very much a novel. Read this first, love this. Read this second, love this. Just read this week, Mercury Pictures Presents, which I bought in hardback for half price. Loved it. I think it's the least of the 3 so far, but I am all in on Anthony Mara. This is just a gorgeous work, multiple stories, real themes about artifice and war and displacement and being held prisoner, restricted about where you can go, whether they were political prisoners in Italy before the war or aliens in Los Angeles during the war. So they're prisoners, but not prisoners. They're not allowed to leave a 5-mile radius, trapped in space. There's lots of stuff going on here. It's just a fine, chunky novel that is well worth your time. Recommend Mercury Pictures Presents. And then last novel, and then I will get out of your way, The Furrows by Namwali Serpell. First of time I've come across this author. I saw this and picked this up half price in London at the end of the year, and it was just in the Tournament of Books, where something just got knocked out in the Tournament of Books. I don't know, I need to find out. It might have been Mercury Pictures Presents got knocked out by The Book of Goose, a book which I thought it wasn't as bad as Organized Dreaming, but was very ordinary. I think it just knocked out Mercury Pictures Presents, but this is coming up. So I read this. After I bought it, I then found it on Steve Donohue's list of worst fiction of 2022, which worried me a little bit. I read this, and I actually read it in one sitting. It's 200 and something pages, 260 pages. I read this Shabbos afternoon. I read the whole of a George Simenon. I read both of these in the same afternoon. Where is it? Yeah. I read The Hangman of Saint-Ponion and The Furrows in the same afternoon. So that's 150 pages and 260 pages. Very little to do Shabbos afternoon. It was okay. I don't think it was the worst thing. Wouldn't have placed it as low down the field as Steve Donohue did, but I didn't. It didn't succeed for me. It's about grief, again, isn't everything about grief these days after you've experienced it? But this is very specifically about grief. The story starts with the main focus being on a woman who was 12 years old when her 7-year-old brother died, and he was in her charge at the time. Initially, we're told it's at the beach, and there's some real vagueness and haziness about what happened. She goes in and out of consciousness. The boy's there, the boy's not there. She wakes up. People are asking her what happened, and she's unable to give a clear answer. And then later in life, we jump forward in time, and she meets someone who's got the same name as her brother, and that's weird. Or she recognizes him. She says, "Wait." Because her mother is obsessed because the boy's body's never found. The mother thinks the boy's still alive. The mother and father break up. The father is African American. The mother is white. So there's some whole race thing going on here. So as a mixed child, and the shading that she's much lighter and her brother was darker. So her father's mother favored the boy much more than the girl. So there's some familial thing going on there. So we have that the child dies, then we jump forward in time, and then there's some kind of natural disaster, earthquakes never made quite clear, something terrible happens, and then there's a reset. 60, 70 pages in, we get a reset, and we're back to being 12 and 7, and this time it's a car accident. and she's there, and the boy gets run over, and she leaves the body, and this, and then suddenly doesn't understand whether, and there was someone else involved, or was there someone dreamy, weird, and this is the tagline on the back. It says, "I don't want to tell you what happened. I want to tell you how it felt." That's a key sentence in this narrative. It's not about telling you what actually happened. It's not about the truth. The truth is not in the steps 1, then step 2, then step 3. The truth is in the response, in the feeling. I want to tell you how it felt. So that's what this is. So we revisit this, and then there's a thing, and then there's a whole other story where somebody, is it her brother or is it not her brother? We don't know which of the actual stories of the brother's disappearance / death is real. The mother has set up a charity to help people find missing children because she's convinced that son's alive, and the daughter knows that he's dead but has been unable really to convince anybody that she saw him die. Lots of weird stuff going on with this race thing going in the background. And then this other person turns up with the exact same name as the dead brother, and we're supposed to, I think we're supposed to wonder, well, is it really him? Has he been missing all these years? Is there something kind of supernatural? Is there something supernatural going on? Don't think so. Then there's another story of another boy with the same name, but is he real or is he in the imagination? Is this person schizophrenic? Is it actually the brother? Is the whole thing a con? It was quite exhausting and unclear what's going on. If you can live happily in a world where things aren't explained, everything laid out for you, and I think, live in that world. I don't think that's my problem with it. I just felt there was too much going on that was left underdeveloped. Trying to explore too many things without really, I'm not sure there's a real idea running through this beyond the fact that isn't grief confusing and discombobulating? Yes. And it's so discombobulating that, look, you're utterly discombobulated. And this is just maximum discombobulation, which is a real thing. And I only have sympathy for the grieving. After I finished the book, I found out that the author lost a sister in her early 20s suddenly. And so there's some element of trying to write through the trauma and the understanding of one's response to grief, and how you continue to see perhaps some version of the person that you have lost, whether it's in dreams or whether it's in your imagination or whether it's a sense. Yeah, that's all in there. There's a lot going on here. Just didn't really work for me. I don't think it's a terrible book. I think it's beautifully written. I think it has some ideas. I just don't think they were fully realized. That's The Furrows by Namwali Sapel. That is more than enough me chatting of all the books that I've read. Good night. God bless. Bye.